As a young child, I was relatively normal. I lived in Maspeth, Queens. I did things that any other child would. However, I could tell that I had some sort of disadvantage compared to the other kids. I frantically had to catch my breath after every gym class or recess. I quickly noticed that I just couldn't keep up with the other kids. Eventually, I gave up hope altogether. Recess became a time for me to sit all alone, just in my little corner, by myself. Other kids didn't enjoy playing with me. Looking back at it now, it's kinda upsetting, but I do get where they're coming from. I mean, why would anyone want to be friends with a kid who couldn't keep up? This was also before the era of iPhones and iPads. I'm sure that if I had those as a child, I would be just fine playing video games with the other kids instead of being alone all the time. One of my earliest flashbulb memories occurred one night when I was 5 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night covered in sweat and gasping for air. I began to cry profusely. I didn't know what was happening and why I was suddenly hurting so much out of nowhere. My mother came rushing into my room to see what was wrong. I told her that I couldn't breathe. The entire house became somewhat of a pandemonium, although that's mostly because my mother and grandmother tend to freak out over anything health related. My mother helped me get dressed, and then my whole family and I left for the hospital. The perilous trek to the hospital was one of wonder and terror. I sat in the back seat of the car and was struggling the whole car ride down to the hospital. There were two things going through my mind at the time. Number one was that I hated doctors as a child. I absolutely despised them. I had always associated doctors with pain, because anytime I went to a doctor, it would involve some sort of discomfort or pain. And yes, I was one of those annoying kids who sobbed endlessly at the doctor's office when getting shots. Don't judge me. Because of my fear for doctors, I thought that things would just get worse at the hospital. The second thing that was going through my mind in the car was that I was fearful for my life. What was happening to me? Just a few hours prior, I was happily eating dinner and watching TV. This became the first of many trips to the hospital in the middle of the night. It was like I had a Netflix subscription, but instead of Netflix, it was hospital visits. Shortly after, I was diagnosed with asthma. Since none of my cousins or immediate family had asthma, my mother was very surprised that I had it. This also meant that she didn't exactly know how to deal with the consequences that came with it. Asthma is a disease that has plagued my early life as a child. Asthma is a condition in which your airways narrow and swell. In turn, this can make breathing difficult. For some people, asthma is merely a minor influence on their lives. For others, it can be a major problem that interferes with daily activities. For the extremely unlucky, it can also lead to life-threatening consequences. My doctor told me that there wasn't a cure for asthma. When he said this, my immediate reaction was, wait, what? Can't be cured? No way! Being constantly plagued by a disease that made it harder for me to function in society was something that I really didn't need in my life. Asthma started to sprout new annoyances in my everyday life. There were many days in school where I had to call my mother to come and pick me up because I had trouble breathing. I began to become paranoid all the time because I didn't know when or where my next asthma attack would be. It took a few visits until I was put on a long-term treatment plan. I received daily pills and an inhaler. Before asthma, the common cold was pretty much the only illness that I had. When I first laid my eyes onto the two types of asthma medication, I had zero faith in them. Another reason for my skepticism was that I didn't take much medication prior to my development of asthma, since the common cold was my only experience with any type of illness, really. This comes from my mother. There's an Asian stereotype where natural recovery and herbs are preferred over pharmaceuticals. My mother fell perfectly into that stereotype. However, I quickly discovered that the asthma medication wasn't a negative whatsoever. Asthma began to weaken its noose around my neck. My paranoia disappeared because I always had my inhaler with me just in case. I could finally hold my own alongside the other children. Eventually, my asthma had diminished to a point that even competitive athletics became possible for me. Throughout middle school and high school, I alternated between the swimming and tennis teams. The ultimate gift of the asthma medication was that it opened my eyes to the medical world. My old perception of doctors being associated with pain had disappeared. It was like a new door had opened, and through it was a path of infinite possibilities. My life was saved by doctors. My victory against asthma is the largest contributing factor that has led to my current pursuit in becoming a doctor today. I was once a patient, desperate for help. With the inspiration from my childhood doctors, I want to be the one tasked with the duty of helping new patients.